So, Jeanette and I, for the last couple of years, 2.5 years or so, have co hosted a podcast. There's a video version of it on LinkedIn, YouTube, audio only version on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, all your usual places. The podcast is called the High Volume Hiring Podcast. We usually publish every couple of weeks. Our guests are very often people like Rachel or other people in the industry, sometimes vendors, and everything we talk about shockingly, is about high volume hiring. I ran across the story of 7-Eleven and a massive talent acquisition effort that it recently undertook related to a big acquisition, reached out to Rachel and basically said, I think this would be a great event for you to sort of share that story. I'm sure there's going to be tons of good. There might be a little bit bad, hopefully none of the ugly. Another reason why I thought this would be really awesome to do, and I think Rachel already knows where I'm going with this, is that I grew up in a relatively small city in Canada called Winnipeg. Winnipeg is the coldest city in the world with more than 500,000 residents, and also somehow the Slurpee capital of the world. More Slurpees are
Congrats.
consumed per capita in Winnipeg than anywhere else. I'm not really sure what that says, but I
Now
get
you
my fair
know.
share. And right now, Jeanette is like, I'm kind of thirsty. So what we usually do in these podcasts is Jeanette and I kind of ping pong back and forth, ask our guests questions, share our insights. Our podcasts are usually roughly 14, 15 minutes. Fortunately, we've got longer for this so we can really dig in. But Jeanette, I will turn the baton over to you. Like Jim said, you're the one who does most of the work. If it works for you, you can kick it off.
I love it. Well, awesome. Well, as Jim said, I'm Jeanette Leeds, CEO of College Recruiter. So I do all of the work and just makes Steven look good. I think a lot of you, also know me. I've been in the, TA tech space as a practitioner, on the vendor side, on the RPO side for like more than a minute. So I also advise a number of HR tech companies. But I've always really been in the high volume campus recruiting space. So I was really excited when Rachel said yes to being on special high volume hiring podcast episode. I will also say I do have another tie like Steven does to 7-Eleven. My son's birthday is 7-Eleven.
Well, that's awesome.
Oh. And my daughter, who Jeanette knows well, was born at 7 pounds, 11 ounces.
That's amazing. I was so close. My middle, which I had while I was at 7-Eleven, was born at 7'12" and weighed 710 pounds.
Close
Yeah,
enough.
close enough.
You guys are all saying that. The funny thing is my daughter, who's younger than my son, when she was born, she was 7'11". Like some
I
that's
love
like
it.
I don't know. So this was like all meant to be. For those who haven't met me in person, I'm 4'10", so I'm really short, but I grow my kids big. Well, at any rate, I know Jim did like some intro for you, Rachel, but I need to like also hype you up here because I know what you have done in the past, few years at 7-Eleven. It really has put you, in my view, in like rare company because from my perspective and what I've heard and talked about is that this what you did, and obviously it wasn't just you, it's a whole team effort,
Correct.
but you
Thank you.
led at this what I would say is one of the most complex high volume
Hmm.
hiring challenges really in
Hmm.
recent years, and looking at two very different cultures, companies, and not just cultures, but ways of doing things and the
Hmm.
number of people that have to get hired. I think I think if I recall the numbers was you had to hire something like 100 people across 13,000 stores and make sure they stayed staff and the change management that went with it, bring in AI and automation, which I know you and your team have won a lot of awards for. So, I'm really excited to like get into the meat and the nitty gritty. And of course there was, lots of good, but no bad or ugly.
Okay. Everything was perfect. Yeah.
Exactly. Lots of, best practices.
There were
Maybe,
some learning moments. How about that
yeah,
instead of bad and ugly? Some opportunities and learning moments along the way. Yeah.
exactly. So maybe we start with like an easy question is like, how did this all begin?
Yeah.
Like let's start from like day one, start.
Okay. Yeah. Great question. So I'm actually a boomerang. This is my second stint here at 7-Eleven. And I came back at the end of 2021. When I came back, the acquisition of a convenience store company called Speedway had just happened. So when I entered the picture, there were the typical complexities that we were facing around that time in hiring of high volume. But add on top of that for us, we had two different brands, two different tech stacks, two different hiring models, two different operating models. And what I mean by all of that is on the legacy 7-Eleven side, they had been primarily franchised. On the legacy Speedway side, 100% corporate. On the legacy 7-Eleven side, the store leaders did the hiring and staffing of their stores for the corporate locations, which were few and far between. And then on the legacy Speedway side, there was a large team in the field that helped with the recruitment and hiring into the stores. And tech stack wise, we were in two different tech stacks as well. So those were definitely added complexities. In addition to that, though, regardless of banner, we were taking too long. We were losing the war on talent to our competitors down the street, just basically because of time. Something that we learned is that when our candidates applied, they applied to, roughly 15 other locations at the same time. So if we're taking too long to get to them, one of those 14 other places that they applied to at the same time that we did has already talked to them, which then leads to ghosting. Because by the time we do connect, they either have found something else and no show in the conversation or even no show in the first day of work. Regardless of banner, we were seeing some similar concerns. But then to address those concerns were those complexities that I mentioned of two different banners, two different hiring models, two different operating models, two different tech stacks, right?
I mean, I don't know if you can get more different than that. It's
Yeah,
like decentralized versus central. I mean, it's just night and day. It's
very different. At first, we went down the path of, we knew we needed support, we needed help. So we went down the path of mimicking more of the legacy Speedway way of recruitment and hiring and added 100 additional contractors on that could help support on the 7-Eleven side. But let me also, you mentioned some numbers. You are correct. We do over 100,000 hires a year. In 2021, it was more like 130, 140,000 and 13,000 locations. But of those 13,000 locations, only 45% are corporate, 55% franchise. So what I'm talking about, we did not do on the franchise side. So the 55% was not in scope and focused on the 45% that's over US and Canada. I will say we are a large global brand. And so there are 86,000 locations globally in 19, 20 countries, regions. But what I'm talking about is specific to US and Canada, which is 7-Eleven Inc. So wanted to throw out some of the context and numbers there. And at first, we wanted to mimic and provide support similar to what we had seen on the Speedway side because they were really good at supporting corporate locations and hiring. So we did do that at first, and it helped. It did help, but it did not help enough, if that makes sense. We were still not necessarily winning the war on talent. We still weren't fast enough, even with the added resources. And quite honestly, a business decision came first. Our COO made the decision to hold our store leaders accountable to labor optimization. Included in labor optimization is the hiring and staffing of their stores. So that business decision was made before we had any idea of a technology that could support that business decision. So overnight, the resources that we had supporting the recruitment for the store level overnight vanished. I want to call out that we did not remove that role for technology. We did not proactively let go of people because we thought technology would handle it. It was very much a strategic decision on the way we wanted to run the business. And we knew what problems we were trying to solve for up front. And we weren't just trying to shove technology down. We didn't even have technology identified yet to support this. I think that's really important to call out. Overnight, those resources were gone. I will say, as a result, though, I more than doubled my field recruitment team and my TA ops team. And we did build a COE that then supported our all store level hiring. So prior, there were resources that did not report up through my team. Now my team is the COE for all store level recruitment. Of course, in order to enable and empower our store leaders to be successful in this new journey of holding them accountable to all labor optimization, I did feel it was necessary to introduce a technology that could set them up for success and to make that happen. So that's when we went on a journey of a technology that could support this new way of working. So That is some of the context that led us into the journey that we did. And I'm sure we'll dig into what did that solution look like and what are the results that we got from that. But I wanted to call out a business decision was made first and foremost. We were not going after a shiny object and trying to force technology down people's throats, but instead, based on this business decision and understanding the issues and concerns we were solving for, we then looked into AI and technology as a channel or a way to support and empower our store leaders to be successful in this new model.
I love that. And that, in my view, is probably one of the main reasons you were so successful. Like you had a very specific, not just use case, but business reason, right? Like it wasn't like, hey, to your point, let me go after a shiny object. This is what we're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And now let's figure out how to do that in a
Correct.
really smart way. Okay, Stephen, let me ask you a question because I feel like I'm like extra chatty today. So I'm going to let you ask a question.
We're good. The more questions you ask, the more informative the conversation will be. Great overview, Rachel. I want to back up a little bit to sort of that moment when you and your team found out, hey, we're buying this big competitor. Are the next months of my life going to be crazy? I have to believe that there was a lot of discussion, a lot of analysis from the candidate's perspective, from the call it the candidate experience. What did they like about the competitor that you bought, that the process, the speed, whatever, versus what did they like about 7-Elevens? How did your team go about looking at what the candidates cared about versus what the company cared about? Because I think a lot of times that lines up, but not always. Like, how
Yeah,
did you decide like which to go with when there were
sure.
conflicts?
So, admittedly, the acquisition happened before I came back. So, I was
Yeah.
not here when that occurred. I came in after the fact, but we were absolutely still in the journey of an acquisition integration. Regardless, we were very intentional on making sure we held our candidate experience as our North Star versus what the hiring manager prefers is easier, if that makes sense. So that was definitely a big driving force in the decision, especially for us. Our candidates are our customers.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
if our candidates have a bad experience, they can vote with their dollars and not show up at a store ever again. So we needed to make that point. We needed to be clear of this is an enterprise wide situation that you need to care about. And we need to prioritize our candidate experience as our North Star. Oh, hey, because they're our customers. That spoke the language of operations. That's a traffic driver. That's bottom line revenue. We were able to speak in the language that made sense to both our CFO and our COO, and making sure that we kept the candidate experience top of mind. We do have a candidate feedback listening tool that we do use so that we could capture, what is it that the candidates like throughout the experience. That being said, that was very difficult to capture where we were in the tech stack at the time because majority of solutions are not made for high volume.
Yes.
And so you do
True.
workaround. Majority,
Although all of the good solutions are talked about on the high volume. No, sorry. Go
yeah, 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 yeah. And I get it. I understand why. So we've put band-aids, historically, which usually meant evergreens. So you just left them on
Yep.
all the time. When you leave something in all the time, it is difficult to tell a story with data because it is difficult to get true transparency on what's really going on in something when it's just always on. We had to do some focus groups and make some assumptions by what a candidate would want to see. And we did do some focus groups of understanding that. But I'm going to be transparent. It was difficult to tell a story with the data we had at the time. There was also the two different tech stacks that we're getting the data out of. We did do what we could in listening to what our candidates wanted. But regardless of having the best data or not, we still were very intentional of our North Star is our candidate experience. Our candidate is our customers. This impacts our revenue. Bottom line, period. So we built the solution that we did and partnered with ops in the way that we did through the lens of what the experience would be for our candidates and taking into consideration candidates are not all created equal. The experience that someone applying at a store level, maybe at 2 a.m, there are different expectations of that candidate than the one applying maybe for a project manager role and expecting to talk to someone in normal business hours. So we also had to have different personas. We couldn't just apply a one size fits all for what we wanted the candidate experience to be. And we adjusted the candidate experience for our high volume side specific to the candidates we would interface with in the high volume side.
Really glad that you mentioned that 2 in the morning thing because I've heard that from other organizations that are somewhat like you, basically 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
kinds of organizations. And I remember somebody at some point saying something to me like to the effect of like, well, if a candidate's going to apply at 2 in the morning,
Hmm.
they don't expect anybody to be getting back to them for, a day or 2 or
They do when it's a
whatever.
24/7 operation there. Terry.
Correct. If the candidate is gonna be looking for, like, a midnight to 8 a.m. shift, and nobody is able or willing to communicate with them at 2 in the morning, you just lost a candidate.
It's a
Jeanette?
unique issue that we have or challenge that we have that not everybody else does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So let's get into our friend Rita. Tell us about Rita. Who is Rita? And I think also thinking about, what you said when under this evaluation process of like, okay, here's our new business model.
Yep.
Now, how do we actually make it work? So,
Yep.
how did you go from, okay, this is going to be the product. How do we make it work? We need technology
Hmm.
to I don't want to give it away, but like Rita, the recruiting assistant, and I
Yeah.
think now what them is handling like 95% of the hiring process. And then I'm also really curious for you to share like about like the evaluation and the build out. Like, let's get into
Hmm.
the nitty gritty. So I know I feel like
Yeah.
I just asked you 10 questions.
No,
No,
but we'll go through all of it. And if I miss any of it, just let me know.
I will. I will.
Um, yeah. So first and foremost, business decision was made. Stores need to be held accountable to their labor optimization, including the staffing of their stores. And I want to highlight again the impact to revenue, not only from the candidate experience, but when you're not fully staffed. The rest of the staff has to take on that burden. There gets to be frustration. Potentially someone else leaves, and eventually you're impacting the customer experience in the location, which also drives revenue. So this was something that we needed to solve for. So we now know that the business decision has been made to hold our stores accountable to their labor optimization. We are now centrally owning the support to those stores is now sitting in my team. We went on the journey to find a way to enable them to be successful in their new role. It needed to be simple. It needed to be quick. It needed to be time easy around the time for them. It couldn't take up a lot of their time because if you think of our store leaders, they are the superheroes in this story. They do everything. And so whatever we were going to throw at them, it needed to be able to fit into their list of all the other things that they do, their inventory management, their cleaning, their stocking, their running the cash register, all the things that they have to do. So we did decide we do think that technology makes sense in this situation. And then again, thinking of the persona of the high volume candidate, let's think specifically of what the experience should look like for them and not the experience for maybe some of the other personas that we go after. And we resulted in a solution that was able to automate 95% of the recruitment process at the high volume level. I would not copy paste that solution outside of the high volume, but it did work in the high volume space. And our candidates told us so, and our store leaders told us so. So, from a talent acquisition perspective, our customers, which are the candidates and our store leaders, both told us this is what they wanted in their solution. But I would not copy paste outside of the high volume for us. But what we introduced was a recruiting assistant. And Jeanette, you mentioned her name is Rita. Rita is named Rita because she is recruiting individuals through automation. And Rita is able to converse. So it's a conversational solution, which is something we really wanted, especially in the high volume candidate space. So Rita will converse with the candidates and interact with them and engage with them first through text. It's like a texting conversation, mobile native. She'll ask some of the few questions and then she will actually schedule the interview with the candidate, with the store leader. So by the time this person walks in the door for the store leader to interview, the store leader has not been involved at all until it's time to have this conversation. Rita, of course, lets the store leader know who's coming in for the conversations, when the conversations are. Rita sends reminders both to the store leader and the candidate. Rita also helps the candidate in preparation with the conversation. Also, Rita is available 24/7. So if our candidate applies at 2, 3 in the morning, Rita immediately engages. And that is something our candidates told us they wanted. They didn't want to feel like they were going down the black hole. For us, we will never automate 100%. We need to have the moments that matter in person will not go away. We want to use the automation and the AI where there are mundane, repeatable tasks, but we will never use it where there needs to be decision making or that kind of the thought process. So the interview for us will always still be in person because these folks are going to be interacting with our customers. So that was never an option for us. So that's why it's only automated 95%. Technically, could we automate 100%? We could. We won't. We wanted to be able to free up the energy of our store leaders to focus on the moments that matter through this process of wearing being that human interaction is important. And so we didn't remove the human from the process on purpose, but we did speed up getting the human to another human in the process. So what used to take weeks or months of getting to someone and in the high volume space that's unacceptable, we now do in less than 3 days. So actual hiring. So not even getting to the person, getting to the interview is even faster than that. But we now are hiring, filling opportunities in less than 3 days when it took us more than 2 weeks before, which was huge.
That is huge. And I love how you use the phrase of like the automation speeds up the human to human interaction.
Correct.
Like the moments
Yep.
that matters, it's getting the humans together. And that's where it all comes down to. Amazing.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that we all learned, sort of coming out of COVID, which is around the same time as
Hmm.
this, was that we need to treat candidates a lot better. There's
Hmm.
been some pendulum switch shift back recently as the labor market has worsened. And I'm not speaking about 7-Eleven. I'm just talking about it in general. But in that 2021, 2022 period, I think you're so right that removing that bad friction, somebody going into a store, can I apply? I'm not sure where the application forms are. Can you come back tomorrow? They come
Yeah.
back tomorrow. Here it is. When am I going to get? Well, you'll get a call, maybe. And just a lot of
Yeah.
inconsistency, a lot of unnecessary delay. And I think just about every organization had a lot of that. What I'm envisioning now is a much more orderly process where, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but I'm kind of envisioning a typical candidate might go to your website, or they might just be like, live 5 houses away from one of your stores and walk up. There's a QR code
That's the
there.
majority for us.
So they use the QR code, up comes the mobile, and Rita basically says, what? Thanks for your interest in working for 7-Eleven. What kind of
Mhm.
a position is it very interactive like that, or is it a more typical ATS kind of a process? Give us all of your data, including uploading a
Mm.
resume through a device where you don't have a resume stored on
Right.
it. Talk with us about, from the candidate experience, how that looks and feels now.
Yeah. So you're right. We removed the negative friction that we didn't want. I think you can strategically add in intentional friction that has a good experience, but we removed the friction that was just time wasters, quite honestly. And we don't require a resume at that level. We rather grab the information through conversation through Rita. Behind the scenes, Rita is filling in the data points, but it feels like a conversation. So the experience doesn't feel like you're filling out a data form. It feels like you're having a conversation. We ultimately, need to get a submission, and so Rita does direct the candidates ultimately to apply, but the information's already been gathered through the conversation. So it is a very conversational experience. A lot of our candidates and a lot of our store leaders think Rita's a real person. They've actually asked to meet
Oh,
Rita, and they
I
say
love
Rita's quite lovely and they think she's the best. Yeah, that's been fun. So it's working. It is giving a very human experience that is actually feels much more human than when a recruiter was directing someone to fill out an application in a form. So it actually feels more of that type of experience than when we actually did have humans kind of helping walk them through the process, which is interesting.
and just to clarify, if I'm a candidate and I choose to engage with Rita, I suspect that you are disclosing, right? But by the end of the conversation,
You've
5 minutes,
forgotten.
10 minutes,
Uh-huh.
whatever, it just feels so
Hmm.
natural that it feels like you're texting with a friend, a kind of
Yep.
thing.
The very beginning of the conversation says that. I'm Rita. I'm a recruiting assistant and AI automation and informing that. But by the end, they've forgotten that
I-
Rita's not a real person.
Awesome. To the
Yeah.
point where they're like, hey, can we actually meet?
Yeah. We'd love to meet Rita.
I
I would love to
oh,
meet her too.
Yeah.
and it's Rita's birthday, July 11th.
Sure. You know what? Yeah, we're gonna go with
Obviously.
that. I like it.
Welcome to Ghosted by the Machine, the podcast about work, hiring, and all the things no one explains after you click submit application. We talk about broken hiring systems, AI filters that eat resumes for sport, recruiter ghosting, and the very real humans trying to survive it. Each episode features real stories, honest conversations, and just enough sarcasm to stay sane. No buzzwords, no thrill to announce, no advice written by an algorithm pretending to be a thought leader. If you've ever wondered where your application went, you are in the right place. This is Ghosted by the Machine. No resume required.
So let's talk for a second. Always, dove in a little bit on the candidate experience. Let's flip onto the store leader side. So where I'm like really thinking is just back to the change management part, right? Like one, you had two different cultures. One was like centralized, decentralized. It was like, let's bring it together. We're changing this whole model. Did you encounter any resistance? Like, how did that change management actually
Yeah.
look like? And I'm also interested in the scale of it, right? Like doing it for a couple stores, not a big deal. Still, obviously, would be, a thing, but the scale. So maybe you could share some, I don't know, any war stories and, tips for any companies.
So I'm actually really glad you brought that up. Change management is so key.
Yeah.
And that needs to be a part of your strategy up front from the get go. It is so often after the fact, hey, we're going to do all this change. Let's come up with a change management plan. And really, what you're saying is, how do we want to deliver this? What's our comms plan? So we were very intentional of making sure that the end users and those impacted had a voice from the get go. We always come up with things with good intentions. No one is trying to, provide something to somebody to make their lives harder. That's never the case. Everyone has great intentions of making everybody's lives easier.
Yes.
But the only person that can really tell us if that's going to be true or not are the people getting impacted. I'm not the one that's going to have to use this tool. I'm not the one that's going to have to make the decisions. I'm not that person. So who is? Okay, our store leaders and our candidates, but we've already talked about that. So let's talk to our store leaders. What do they want to see in this solution? What would genuinely make their lives easier? Just listening of the challenges they face on a day-to-day basis. And if what we're going to ask of them is going to make it way harder or if it's going to actually make it easier. So instead of making some assumptions and having good intentions, go directly to the source and ask them, what does this feel like?
I just do that all the time.
Well, sometimes because you don't want to inconvenience and you're trying to come up with a solution to make their lives easier, you don't want to slow them down with asking all these questions and getting their feedback. Again, I understand it's coming from a good place, but sometimes you need to slow down to speed up. That is what we did. So from the get-go, who is this impacting? Who are our stakeholders? Do we have it right? Asking everybody else, is there anyone else that's going to get impacted about this that we didn't think of?
Oh, yeah.
And making sure so that we have a team called like ops services. That's kind of like a COE that supports operations. And, they were like, hey, this team will be impacted by this. Okay, let's talk to them. Who else? What other operations leaders do we need to talk to? What other HR folks do we need to talk to? The store leaders. So, casting that wide net of anyone that's going to be impacted by these decisions and telling them, you have a say in this, you have a voice. We want to understand what makes sense for the business. And so often, it feels like things are happening to you, not with you. It feels like you didn't have a say. And when you feel like you don't have a say, you feel out of control and then you act emotionally. So it's human nature, right? And we wanted to make sure we were working with and going on a journey together versus shoving something down. Our main stakeholder, our store leaders, we had a lot of conversations with, and we did do a small pilot even. And we did the pilot less to see if it worked and more to build champions. So then we leveraged these champions and these cheerleaders to sell the other store leaders on this amazing solution versus us, who's in corporate, telling them how great this thing is. And we created this pull instead of this push. So we took these store leaders on a roadshow to tell them from their own point of view the experience they had. And then we had people knocking on the door. When's it my turn? When am I going to get this? And so thinking ahead of who are the people that are going to be impacted, make sure they have a voice, let them know the changes you made because of their voice. And then you create these champions and these cheerleaders that bring the people along the journey with you. So that worked really, really well for us. And you don't have to do that. When you have alignment from the CEO, you can say thou must and you can force it. That is an option. So this maybe initially felt a little bit slower because of the route that we took, but again, slow down to speed up. In the end, the actual implementation of this went very, very quickly. So we had this implementation where we built these champions and these cheerleaders. We brought them on a roadshow to share with everyone else. And then we thought we were going to go in more of a waves. And we did. We kind of did waves, but it was all of the waves were done within like 3 weeks.
Oh,
So
wow.
That's like 3.5 weeks in Celsius, isn't it?
right, the translation. So we were, thousands of locations, I'd say 5 to 6,000 locations within a few weeks. In addition to the change management of, along the journey, we also had a very strong strategy around our hypercare. So we didn't want to go live and then say, hope everything works out. See you later. Especially since we are now the COE supporting this. So we built out a very large hotline team that was dedicated and had their own phone number and dedicated purely to hiring questions for the stores. We have other resources for our stores that can call in about tons of questions, but press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and they're used to that in what their day to day is. That's built in. They know how to work it. That's great. We were very intentional of carving this out separately since this was so new and so big to helping them be successful. So we built out this large hotline team with a separate number that was specific to hiring questions. And on the day that we went live with the first wave, everybody's anxiously waiting. And you know how these implementations usually go, you start hearing everything. We heard nothing.
Is this the best of news or is this the worst of
And
news?
so we had to have the hotline call into the stores. And the stores were like, this is great. Yeah, we're doing fine.
Go
Yeah.
away. I'm
Yeah.
too busy hiring.
That's the first time I think I've ever experienced that in a large implementation of something of this size. So I will say, okay, we did have a moment of pivot. I do want to talk about that based on the listening to those impacted. I had something called an in-store experience. So we all have to work in a store I get to work in a store. I get to work in a
I
store.
like framing.
And it really is a great experience.
Yeah.
It really does ground you in, all these wonderful ideas that you have. What does that really look like in real
Yep.
life? So I was so excited. I told my store leader, great news. This awesome tool is coming. You're going to love it. And my experience was like in February or March, and we were going to go live in March or April. And that was on purpose because we have something called the 100 Days of Summer. That's our seasonal hiring. So in theory, let's have this go live before the 100 Days of Summer, and it's going to be so great. That store leader said, please no, not one thing right before the 100 Days of Summer. Everybody packs everything in right before.
Oh.
And okay, good point. Went back to the COO and said, this is the feedback I got in my in-store experience. We have a project timeline and we will be late if we, change this. We're supposed to go live by this certain date. And I, fail hitting those deadlines if we move this. But I think the right thing for the business is to move this to October. We did some more focus groups, tapped into folks saying, timing wise, we asked about what you want and what you need in the solution. Now let's talk timing. And it was agreed, yeah, let's delay it. So we purposely delayed and purposely missed a deadline because of the feedback that we got directly from those impacted and moved the rollout to October. So you make decisions based on the information you have at the time. But as you get more time, you need to adjust, put your enterprise hat on and what's best for the business. And instead of arbitrary deadlines, what makes sense as new information is gathered. And I think that's also something I would highlight as really important in a big implementation. Yeah.
And Rachel, that sounds also just very consistent with what you were saying earlier about sometimes you have to go slower to go faster. If the rollout had stayed on schedule and been fast and crashed and burned,
Right.
that wouldn't have helped anybody. I'm just sort of
Right.
picturing the inside of a store at like the 20th of April or whatever it might be, and they're changing the end caps and updating the
Right.
signage and all of that. And
Right.
it's like, we're too busy selling stuff to
Mhm.
be like trying to figure out this technology that maybe it's going to make my like a heck of a lot easier right away. But I don't know that until
Correct.
I've actually started using it. And by that time, it's too late. So I know we have like a handful of minutes left, and we've got a few really good questions.
Ooh.
Jeanette, are you okay if I kind of like pick them off and then you
Go
can
for
you
it.
can take us home? The first question is, will 7-Eleven ever go the route of Amazon Go stores? So for those who don't know, those are the stores that you can basically walk into, you pick an item off the shelf, you walk out, and you don't actually ever like go to a cash register. Amazon just sort of bills it to your account. What says 7-Eleven?
Great question, and I don't fully know the answer on that. It obviously to be explored. I will say, timing wise, we were ahead of the curve when it came to delivery. So we implemented the delivery right before COVID. So we were able to deliver during COVID, and we have created some self checkout options, a couple of different solutions in that. I'm sure something will be explored as far as, I think you said go, where you can go in and not have to, you can walk in and it reads you from the app and you walk out. There was also, the exploration of kind of a ghost kitchen where during COVID, there were some locations to be used as logistically delivery locations
Mm,
and not an actual, store. So did leverage that when we needed to during COVID as well. So I don't feel informed enough to even hypothesize around the direction on that.
cool. So the answer is Tuesday. I'm just kidding. Um,
Right? Yeah.
so another one, and I'll ask the question. If you're not able to share, tell me too bad. But let me broaden this also to just kind of like all the vendors that you were using for the planning, the tech, et cetera. But I think she was zeroing in mostly on the tech platform that you're using for Rita. Did you
Mm,
build it? Are
okay.
you licensing it? If you're licensing from who, who are your vendors?
Yeah, great question. So Rita is actually through technology called Paradox. Paradox was recently acquired by Workday, but when we went through this, it was not. And then I will say one of the tech stacks that we had prior to leveraging Paradox was iSense to Oracle. And then on the other side was Workday. So we put Paradox on the front end experience being powered by two totally different ways behind the scenes. We have since, fortunately, all moved into one, thank goodness, which has simplified the design. But at the time, you can imagine how crazy that was. But the good news from that is when we did do the implementation of our new HCM that covered the whole company, the experience for our store leaders didn't change because the experience through Paradox stayed the same, even though behind the scenes we did a lot of changing and shifting. They'd already gone through all that and nothing changed for them while the rest of us went through some new change management. But
I,
yeah,
I, I
Paradox
got
is who we use for Rita.
I gotta think that the less that the store level people know is changing, the better. They've got 100 things that they need to worry about every single
What
day
does
that
that
they
mean
don't.
for me? What do I have to
Oh,
do? Right.
heck yes.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, just side note is
Mm.
like your data now, just thinking about the beginning,
Oh my God.
right? Like what a mess.
Night and day different. We can make data driven decisions. The part that we didn't anticipate, which was a happy surprise, is we were able to save quite a bit in our recruiting marketing dollars. And we didn't think about that. But we were, prior to this, having to do blanket campaigns and nationwide campaigns. With the data that I now have, I can make a decision store specific for recruitment
Ah,
marketing dollars and be very intentional and strategic of where we put those dollars versus peanut butter spread across the nation. So that was a happy accident. Yeah.
yeah, we see that from more and more of our customers where basically the same posting in 2,000 locations, but at any given time, it might be these 200. A month later, it might be that 100, and it's very much driven by that local need. It's so much better for everybody up and down the food chain. What
Yep.
candidate wants to apply to a job that isn't
That
available?
isn't really there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if they see that posting 3 months later or a year later, and then they apply, now you've got a happy candidate.
Forgot to mention this, that no longer do you have to open a rec, post a rec, take it down, any of that. It is, we own the management of what the requisitions, I guess. Centrally, the store experience is literally a toggle. So they click a button and then it's posted and people start showing up. When they hire someone, that button gets clicked off. We will watch too. We do pull reports and watch daily to see if something's been toggled on for longer than we think it should be and call in to say, hey, do you mean to have this? Because we need to make sure that we're, to your point, there really is legitimately a need. Otherwise, people are going to show up at your store where you don't really need them. So we watch it on the back end too. If it's been toggled on for more than a couple weeks, where we start asking questions. But the experience is super simple for them. We manage all of the administrative stuff behind the scenes for them. Love it.
So the last one that I had is not about recruitment, it's about retention. Now that you've got some data, what impact are you seeing on the retention store level employees?
Great question. So some of the wins that we had through this is we saved our store leaders 40,000 hours a week, more than 2 million hours a year.
Store leaders each work 40,000 hours a week. Your overtime must be crazy.
That is across all of them.
Okay.
Thousands. And we also were able to obviously speed up the process. So we get folks hired in very quickly. What we didn't really realize is how much that would impact quality. So by getting to the candidates first, we're getting to the best first. They're not getting picked up by our competitors down the street. By improving the quality of the hire, we improved retention. By solving for speed, we solved for cutting down on recruitment marketing dollars, and we solved for quality, which solved for retention, which is pretty crazy. I mentioned, when we were going live with this, we were doing about 130,000 plus hires. This past year, it was only like 100,000. And that speaks to the retention. The number of positions we have didn't change. So this was a adjacent challenge that we were wanting to solve for, and other means that really helped. Now, I will say a big chunk of the ownership around retention and stickiness really is our store leaders, or outside of high volume. Any of the hiring managers really need to be held accountable to quality of hire, because really it's often the experience they have in onboarding and training. And did we fully equip this person to be successful in role? And that is not on recruitment. That is on the hiring manager and the role that they come into. So by freeing up our store leaders' time, they are also able to devote and dedicate more time to properly onboarding them as well, which also made a big difference. So there was a lot of trickle down impact that happened from just trying to enable our store leaders to be equipped to do this new task they had. Yeah.
Okay, you saved, 40,000 hours a week across all the store leaders. That's 200 million hours. Again, lots of overtime being paid. So where did that time go, right? Like, what are the store leaders doing with that extra time? And so it sounds like the onboarding, making sure that they're bringing on everyone, in a great way, which improves retention, et cetera. Any other?
If I could do things over, I would have been much more intentional of the design around where that saved hours would be used.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's being used in good ways. So part of it is being able to focus more on the onboarding aspect of it, but just the day-to-day operations, and where the being able to serve our customers in the way that we should. So, the hours that they were spending on recruitment was a lot of administrative stuff, and our candidates were falling into that black hole. And so now our store leaders can focus on providing the right customer experience. And then we've also enabled them to provide a better candidate experience. So all in all, much better use of time.
I have been enjoying this conversation, and I'm going to date myself. I'm looking at the screen and I got like this Brady Bunch feel. Cause like 3 of you outside and 1 person here. That was cool. We're almost out of time, but I want to pitch one more question cause I can. So, is it true that the better the brand, the cheaper the recruitment marketing budget?
I like that
Is
question.
it true?
Inquiry minds want to know.
So I don't think so, but here's where I'm going to go with that. So yes, a larger brand is well known, but sometimes that creates a challenge of overcoming what your brand is to be what your aspirational aspect of it is. So in the example of 7-Eleven, if you want to overcome being the place for smokes and cokes, a lot of dollars need to go into rethinking what are putting dollars behind the experience that the employee has, and a focus on employer branding and EVP. So yes, we are a very large consumer brand, but if we were to solely ride on, hey, come work for us, we sell Slurpees, we are not setting the right expectations.
You are for me.
It can work. Does it help us get our foot in the door in some cases? Sure. And we definitely leverage our consumer brand in a lot of ways, but we have to spend our dollars differently, because of the brand that we do have is not exactly the expectation we want to set as what it's like to be an employee here. Versus the company that I was at before coming back to 7-Eleven is not a well-known brand to a consumer, because they're not directly working with candidates. And we put a lot of dollars behind just having visibility and awareness around who we were. So I don't know that the dollars are less. The dollars are spent differently. What I will say is less. We are spending less now, though, because, like I said, we can be very strategic in where we put the dollars versus having to do a blanket campaign. No, it could. It could be a lot cheaper if you have this most amazing brand that you don't want to adjust. That the consumer brand exactly matches. 100% what the employee experience is going to be. Yeah, you could probably save some dollars there, but we are trying to be very intentional of setting expectations around what it means to actually be an employee here and the impact you have to a community. Everybody has a nostalgic memory of what 7-Eleven is. That's what we want to be driving is the community impact we have, how we give back to the community, the way that we make a big difference because people want to have meaningful purpose behind what they do. So just where we're putting our dollars looks a little bit differently maybe than another company that doesn't already have that.
Yeah, you don't see too many 7-Elevens here in Atlanta, if at all.
No, but you have Speedway.
Yeah. Okay.
So in your
Okay.
Speedway, you'll find Slurpees.
Cool. I think, as I pointed out in the chat, you can check it out. 7-Eleven would be a good spot for a sitcom, which could be a great
Yes.
recruiting tool. Just throwing it
Yeah.
out there. I will work for Slurpees. All right. Thank you for your time. We'll be back here with even more great content in about 5 minutes, give or take. I know Jeanette has to work. She works a lot. Even to do his hair from there.
Thank you,
Thank
Rachel.
you.
Thanks for that.